Oh, here we are. Well,
Hey.
ran into a rainstorm, cold rain and snow. Don't these guys ever learn? Uh, it's that old Colorado deja vu. I was there in 2019 when the show got
Yeah,
interrupted. They got
right.
a little further into the set this time, and things aren't torrential right now. But it's very important to be safe in Colorado with the weather, as a horrible hailstorm at Red Rocks a few weeks ago will tell us. We're
Yeah.
not going to do the Nugs.net plugging. You all know how wonderful Nugs is. Check it out for yourself at Nugs.net. Uh, we want to get to our interview with Derek Featherstone, who was making it sound so
Yeah,
good up
we
until a few
we
moments
we
ago.
we don't know what's going to happen with the rest of the set. They condense the rest of the show into one set, etc. So we're going to do our set break thing right now. You heard Bertha, New Speedway Boogie, Cold Rain and Snow, Jack Straw, Althea, and playing in the band. And
Sort
man,
of.
I hope they get to come back to work because Jesus, they were on a roll.
Yeah, well,
Anyway,
they came back from that storm in 2019 in really good shape. So they'll probably finish that playing in the band at some point. Maybe not this week, but you never know with these guys. So let's go. We interviewed Derek Featherstone, the masterful front of house sound man, and he revealed just what goes into that job of making these huge venues sound so good. So let's go to that right
yeah.
now. We won't be back afterwards, I'm pretty sure, because there won't be a real set break as far
Yeah.
as I know. So happy 4th of July. Stay safe, everybody. We'll see you next, I imagine, from up there in Washington at the Gorge.
Friday at the Gorge, right?
Yeah, have a good night, everybody, and happy
Bye,
4th.
everybody. Thank you. Have fun.
Well, for those of you who have been fortunate enough to see Dead and Company live on this tour or any of their tours, you know how magnificent the sound is, attributable to how well the band is playing, but also in large part to our guest here, the gentleman who does the front of house sound mixes for Dead and Company since the very beginning. Please welcome our friend Derek Featherstone. Hey, Derek.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you with us.
We should
It's
also
no,
mention we should also mention that Derek is moving the technology of live sound reproduction forward even as we speak, because he also is one of the owners of Ultrasound, the company that makes the systems. And of course, they've been advancing the state of the art for decades now, and Derek is carrying on that tradition. Derek, the sound has been extraordinary on this tour. I've gotten out to 7 shows, and I've gotten to talk to you a little bit. And as you know, I like to wander the venue and go way up to the rafters and hear all that. And the uniformity of clarity of the sound is just stunning, especially in some very large and acoustically problematic spaces. So
yeah.
a lot of our audience is probably unfamiliar with how all this happens. So if you could give just a basic sketch of your job and how you do it.
Yeah, well, that's basic. Let me think about that one. You turn it on, you turn it on, you turn it up, and you turn it off. No, the basically, it's interesting with the acoustics and buildings and sound systems. Like the progression in the development of live sound has been amazing. Like when you go back to early days, we started working with the Grateful Dead in 1979, 1980, and on the premise they just wanted a better sounding sound system, which started with stage monitors because they just wanted to hear better. And the value of working with an artist like that is that they have no problem advancing forward financially and whatever to make something better. So they're sort of like, there's not sort of, which is to their demise possibly too, but there's no guy at the end of the road with a budget saying no. So it's endless development. So it's a work in progress, a science project, and but it's gone so far. And I think in the early 70s, 1970, 1980 was just a free for all of what people would do with audio. They just would, stack speakers up. I look at some of these pictures and some of these concerts from the 70s. I can't imagine how anyone heard what was happening. and the early days of sound reinforcement really was just to get the vocals over a guitar amp. So, and then all of a sudden, and that was a limited size building. So that as the buildings got bigger, you had to actually turn the guitars up also. Then you had to turn the drums up, and it just grew and grew and grew. So in the, end of the 70s, we started working closely, and I was not in the business. I was in the business, but not at this company at the point. But we connected with John Mayer, and he sort of had the same desire to forward the technical advancement of audio, and was did it from a scientific perspective, and sometimes not the most practical, because we'd have to then grab what he was building and actually put wheels on it so we could move it places, or put metal on it so we could get it up in the air. But he'd build a perfect sounding speaker cabinet. So, you know, that advancement kind of that was probably the Meyer MSL3, which came out in maybe 1981 or 80 or somewhere on there, was the first sort of uh, real big step on sound systems. And then there were other companies like Clare Brothers, which was always charging ahead building, you know, large format systems also. And they had also a very good development path and idea of just going further and further with it. And as we got a little further down the way, these line array systems sort of allowed us to control what we do in buildings better. So in the past, you'd set up 10 speakers, you'd point them that way, they'd bounce off the walls, the roof, and everything, and you'd get sound places, but not what you really wanted. So with the ability we have now, we can focus speakers. Like for instance, on this current tour, I think we have 72 Meyer Panther speakers, which are the main cabinets. And we have control of every single box. So it's not like, you know, it's a big lump here and a lump there of left and right. It's basically we can control the 10th box from the top. If we have a section of glass in the back of the room, we could turn that box down or off.
Wow.
And so we you know, shoot the room with lasers in the mornings, and we have a great audio team that just, you know, assembles this stuff. And you know, we've been to these buildings a lot, and I personally really enjoy mixing in baseball stadiums because, you know, they're lively rooms, not like overly lively, but what you would have more in a basketball arena where they're trying to make a room loud. But, you know, baseball stadiums have a bit of energy to them, but then it goes away, and you don't get stuck with reflections and bounce back. So it's been a long path to develop to where we are with aiming and controlling sound systems, and that's a big part of what's going on.
To clarify just a little bit, you John Meyer and his team and colleagues have organized this thing so that each speaker has a very, very directional throw, and you organize the speakers so that they cover the area evenly instead of all throwing the same sound in the same direction. Some of this at least emerges from Owsley's vision. The line arrays and stuff began with the wall of sound, the idea that each sound would have a single point source and the speakers would all operate in cooperation like this. And you guys have brought the technology all the way up here into the future so that this is done just with amazing efficiency and clarity.
Yeah, no, that's fairly true. And I, you know, as you look at, if you're standing out in the crowd and you look up and you see these long arrays of speakers, you know, some people think, well, you know, what's the purpose of all that? And the concept of a line array is vertical placement of speakers, and the speakers couple and throw further. And, you know, that the purpose of all that is to have that control, because if you had, you know, two big clusters of speakers and just turn them up as loud as you could, it's just not going to go evenly. The guys super close to the speakers are going to get their ears fried off, and the people in the back are going to be saying what. So it is a really about even deployment in each building. And we have a lot of modeling software that you can, we take, you know, if the buildings aren't drawn up in AutoCAD, we take satellite photos, and then we'll go into AutoCAD and scale the building.
Wow.
So you basically have a sense of the size of, you know, the first base to second base. So you scale that, and then you draw the building on the satellite photo, and then you start putting your stage in and your speakers in, and then you run this modeling software to make sure you're going to hit these seats up there and those seats. I mean, it's a science project for sure.
So you can calculate where each speaker will go and how sound will bounce around the arena as well. I mean, this is amazing stuff.
Yeah. We calculate the reflections are tough to calculate in some ways, but you do calculate the even volume disbursement to all the seats, and that's the idea that you know, it's gain shading is what they call it, but you basically you're trying not to turn the speakers closest to people up loud, and you're trying to turn the ones up high super loud so they go further. And so it's and they're all Meyer Sound has this program called MAP, which is allows you to do those predictions, and then you set the speakers on certain volumes and angles, and that's how you get your most uniform coverage. And then the end result when we're done is we walk the room completely from deck to deck during the daytime with music playing to make sure we actually got it right. And sometimes you'll have to change, you know, tip some speakers up or tip them down. But there's, you know, it's an audio crew of 7 people out here that kind of put this thing together, and you know, and you start at 8 in the morning, and we're barely ready for sound check every day.
Yeah.
And when you're there at your mix position, I've stood there out there with you and watched you work. And you are standing behind a console that has how many faders across the front? I mean, you have how many and then there's another mixer to the side. So I think you
Yeah.
must be looking at like 100 inputs.
It's about 120 by the time it's done. So you're sitting out there from from a it's funny because having done this for 35 years, it's kind of natural, and you're just listening and looking at everything, and you're really listening for things that don't sound right, and you modify them in real time, and then you're essentially as the front of house engineer role, is you're trying to make the mix stay consistent. So if if somebody on stage turns up super loud, then you turn them down so it doesn't overwhelm the mix. Or if they would go quiet, you bring them back in, and or someone gets super excited and starts playing very, very hard, and you basically have to work with different tools, whether it's compression or volume, to keep the mix stable, which is essentially like if you were sitting in your house listening to a record that was mixed and engineered, it doesn't ever change. It's done. But when you put the element of live players in on actually pushing the music through the speakers, you're like, oh boy, anything can happen at this point.
Yeah, and the number of variables is just staggering, from the body density of the people in the crowd to the materials from which the building is constructed. We of course have talked for decades about Barton Hall and that show in 1977, and then Dead and Company returning this year for an extremely memorable show. That is an extremely problematic building, and it took just, I don't know how many yards of drapery that you had to bring in and hang to make those walls less reflective. So let's talk about that, the actual treatment of buildings like that.
Yeah, I mean, the Barton Hall is a good example because, I think I used maybe 1,800 feet of drape to, get reflections off. And in fact, I was, felt a little bad by covering up the glass window that says Barton Hall on it, because that's a big, memory of that building. So I had the video guys take a picture of the window before I covered up, and they put that on the video wall in front of us.
Oh, so that's great.
We kept it in play a little bit, but I was like, historical value of this giant piece of glass that's 100 feet wide, and it literally starts at the last seat. So you can never, like, when we talk about accuracy of aiming speakers, you're gonna get within 7 feet of landing. But if you hit that glass, it's like the rest of the show is going to hear a reflection. They're going to hear two guitars, or they're going to hear drums go back, bump, bump. So it's a lot going. And again, treatment of rooms, we don't often get to do that. But in this particular case, Barton Hall was, we took the place over. Like when we walk into a stadium, we don't have the time to do a lot of that stuff. Right. If we're doing a residency somewhere, you get a little more leeway to do it. But it's something that's, when you do it. And I, haven't done, I think I did further in Barton. I feel like I was in there one other time. You just try to duck and cover and get in and out of that place before you get clobbered. But I feel like what everyone put into it, from the audio, lighting, and video, the whole crew, but from the sonic perspective, the sound crew did a great job, just following the path. And the good thing about all these guys at Ultrasound that are out here are, again, they understand the band's commitment to audio. They understand what we're all trying to do, and there's never pushback. It's always like, and sometimes I ask for some kind of crazy things, and it's never met with resistance. It's like, okay, let's get it done. So
yeah, well, the Grateful Dead were way ahead of the curve in sort of demanding better PAs, like giving promoters grief about getting the better PAs. When the Dead were first getting started in earnest as a touring band, this is just like a year after the Beatles were playing stadiums with 50,000 people screaming, and PA systems that wouldn't have been adequate for a polka party at an American Legion Hall somewhere, and then the second year the Beatles played Shea Stadium, I was there, just yards away from where Citi Field is now, and it improved somewhat. Bill Hanley, actually, who wound up doing this out at Woodstock, brought in the first, like, a precursor to the modern system. Beatles still didn't have floor monitors. They were hearing their voices through their guitar amps. Incredibly primitive. And the Monterey Pop Festival is cited as one of the first places where they actually started thinking about the sound at rock concerts. And then the state of the art kept increasing. Of course, the Grateful Dead not only demanded better, they said, okay, we're going to start building our own systems. And that culminated in Alembic and the Wall of Sound and all that. So they've been really part of the process rather than just a band that's benefited from it.
Yeah, I would agree completely. Because when you're back in those Beatles days, like, the way they would approach those baseball stadiums, you know, with no sound system, is they would send a feed off their little mixing board into the speakers in the balconies, or in the for the baseball PA announce speakers, where some broadcaster would be talking. So it would basically, when that band is playing, they would hear it literally 2 seconds later coming out of the speaker, like 300 yards up there.
And a shitty speaker, a horn on a pole, right? The kind like what we used to see at ballparks back then.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because that's why they couldn't do it. You know, the demand for them to play to X number of people was way ahead of the technology. And you know, it's interesting. I did a show with Paul McCartney at Outside Lands a few years back, and I got to thinking that, man, this guy went from seeing those little single speakers or baseball stadiums to these, again, that was a full Meyer line array system. He outlasted it, which was amazing to see, because you know, even Grateful Dead guys started, you know, a few years later when things were moving, but by the time the Beatles walked away from live sound, you know, the development started post that, and so those guys saw nothing. And I thought, man, that must be interesting from his perspective to actually be heard, you know.
Yeah. You know, I had an alternative universe version of the Beatles in my head. If they had shown up at the Monterey Pop Festival and saw that, oh look, a good PA system, you know, maybe we could play these subtle songs from Revolver or Sgt. Pepper live at some point, you know, but they were so dispirited by what they were experiencing that they just hung up the live band aspect entirely. We were talking about sound bouncing around stadiums, and we are talking to you as the band is in Boulder. And I remember you telling me a few years ago in Boulder, you like mixing that stadium because at the back of the hall, there's like no upper deck for sound to reflect off. It just goes like over the top of the bowl, and it's a fortunate place for that big a space to mix it.
And a related question before you answer: does that giant brick building behind offer any acoustic advantages?
Not really. No, we sort of just try to avoid it. And but it's funny because for our selfish purposes of having no, you know, reflections off of overhang, those overhangs in stadiums are provided for patrons to have crowd protection and weather protection. So at our selfish needs of having no reflections, you're going to get pretty damn wet if it starts raining. But,
as we did in 2019. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So, and I'm sure we're not making friends outside of the stadium, because a fair amount of audio is then leaving the building and wandering over to neighborhoods, or maybe they're liking it, you know, certain people. I think
Boulder's a pretty dead friendly town. Yeah.
And I think that as we move around to outside the building, as we come in with the band or whatever, and it's so congested to get into that place, I think anyone here or in Boulder is going to, if they don't like it, they might go on vacation this weekend. But it might be a wiser move than try to fight it, because I don't feel like anyone's going to listen to their complaints.
Well, they'll get over it. You know, the band has seemed really happy on this tour in terms of, you know, connecting with one another on stage. And I think the technology has helped them. We talked to Jay Lane yesterday, and we were talking about how, despite the vastness of these spaces, there is a sense of intimacy among the musicians. You know, there's a lot of eye contact, and there's real responsiveness between them, and there's responsiveness between the band and the audience. And this is not stadium rock in the sense that most stadium rock is just there to pummel an audience into submission. Yeah, there is so much subtlety in this music and so much nuance. That's why I go way up to the highest reaches of the stadium to see if I can still hear and feel that. And it's there, and it seems oxymoronic, but there is intimacy in these large spaces because the band is still having a conversation with one another and with the audience.
Yeah. No, it first and foremost starts with the band, because the band, you know, can't hear, then they can't necessarily play. They're faking at that point.
Right.
So, you know, the technology we have on stage, whether they're using monitors on the ground or in-ear monitors or a combination of both, then they can actually hear each other and work off of each other. Is crucial. It's interesting if you pull back and you look at like other artists that are on the road right now, there's not many bands doing, you know, 117 channels or whatever the hell it is, of real live audio with zero playback. It's them playing what they're playing, so that it's crucial to hear each other. And, you know, and I always make I can't fix that. The source has to start good. My theory is, if you suck, I'm going to make you suck louder and everyone's going to hear it. But,
I remember one of the guys in the Eagles told me years and years ago, he said very often at these kind of gigs, the stage is the quietest place in the building.
Yeah.
You know, the sound reinforcement is all pointed out there, but the intimacy is available to a properly connected stage, right?
Yeah, if for certain, like when we're doing rehearsals or sound checks or whatever, if I turn off all those speakers, it goes pretty quiet, and it's and that's another reason why they can hear themselves, because you can't, if one person's being super selfish and turning up real loud, then they're doing two things. No one's listening. They're not listening to anybody, and they're too loud. They're stepping on everybody else, and then it drives the volume. Then the next guy's got to turn up so he can play and hear himself, and then all of a sudden the next guy does, and then you diminish the return of the quality of audio. So it's these guys, and Bobby in particular is just so thoughtful about keeping the volume in a good place. It's intuitive. It's natural to him to like land in a spot where he's can make it work, and he's vocal enough about it if it's problematic. He doesn't the volume,
and he also says correctly, in my experience as a musician, that when you play louder, you play faster. When you play faster, you play louder. And by controlling tempo and volume, you can keep everything in a reasonable spot. I hate to say this, Derek, but we are running out of time.
Yeah, man.
No problem.
We could talk to you. We could absolutely talk to you for hours. We only have a fraction of that because some band is shoving us out of the way to get back on stage. And I think that's unreasonable, but I guess we'll let them. But
just this one time.
Yeah. Hey, come talk to us on the radio sometime. I always love talking to you and getting your insights into this stuff. And well, I'll be seeing you next in San Francisco. And that's kind of an acoustically quirky place with that long brick wall along the outfield. So I'm sure you're girding yourself for those challenges as well.
Yeah, for sure. We are working on it as we speak. So.
All right, man.
Thank you, Derek Featherstone. It's been great talking with you today on Dead Air.
Enjoy the rest of the tour.
Come out and visit. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.